So I'd like to begin by sharing a little story, a personal story that I hope will help us understand what this is all about. I had this tendency, as I've mentioned before the day even barely begins, to have identified 8 to 10 things that are wrong, things that I need to be wary of, need to be prepared for, need to make sure that I don't overreact to. And I thought about these within the context of my personal 4 conditions. And one of the personal conditions that is in play here for me is the 3rd condition of the experiences we have when we're growing up. On a day-to-day basis, conditions in our household could be pretty uncertain. They could be great one day and pretty rough another day. And I had my own sensitivity and reactivity to that. I mean, obviously, Rob grew up in the same household that I did. And as we've talked about this, we agreed about the uncertainty. But he didn't have the same reaction to it that I had. He wasn't as affected by the uncertainty as I was. And so that probably goes in part to the particular way that our parents' gene pool showed up in me versus in him. He, generally speaking, is a less reactive person than I am. I also, and this is similar for Rob, we both are people who are very responsible. So we're in a place that's uncertain, and I have this reactivity to it, and I tend toward responsibility. So I want to know what could potentially go wrong. I've gotten in this habit over the last 60 to 70 years of identifying what's going wrong, what could go wrong, so I'm prepared, so I know how to deal with it, so I don't have too much reactivity to it. This is a way of protecting myself from disapproval, from ending up in a situation where I behave in a way that others disapprove of. And of course, when you're young, it's your parents' disapproval that you're most attuned to, perhaps along with teachers or other adults who are prominent in your life. So this is how this habit came to be for me. Now, with mindfulness, with my learning to observe my thoughts, my emotions, and my sensations, that helps me be aware a little bit earlier of this tendency to identify what could go wrong and be caught up in it, be controlled by it. Instead, I become aware of my what could go wrong list as an observer. I'm just noticing it. And that gives me a little space. That then allows me to look more closely at the list and realize that at least half of them, if not more, are things that are very unimportant, don't matter, not worth getting all wired up about. And thinking clearly about how to take care of a couple of them, and then just letting go of the rest of it. What's really helped me in dealing with all of this is this understanding of the role that these 3 or more of these conditions play for me in dealing with this. So I not only have this general awareness that it's happening and some space around it, but I have this deeper understanding of where this came from, of how this tendency to identify what's wrong is beyond my control. It arises from conditions, circumstances in my life that are beyond my control. The uncertainty in my life, the inclination to be reactive that's in my gene pool, the conditioning for responsibility, the conditioning to be sensitive to disapproval. All those things are beyond my control. And so I not only have being in this place of the observer working in my favor, but I have this deeper understanding, of how much of it's beyond my control. And so I can forgive myself for this habit. And once I'm forgiving myself for it with this deeper understanding, then the acceptance and the letting go and the finding the space come even easier. So the combination of just the basic mindfulness technique of being the observer and the understanding of how the four conditions show up in me, and really deeply appreciating how those four conditions are beyond my control, puts me in a place where I have an even better chance of not getting caught up in and controlled by this list of things that I think are wrong. It gives me freedom. I'm not controlled by the grasping around wanting to control these things. I'm not controlled by the fear that these things can go wrong. And I'm not in the ignorance of not having any idea what's happening. So let's engage in a little reflection practice here. And begin by thinking about some habit that's present in your life that you'd like to have a little less of. A habit you don't really need, like my habit of knowing excessively what's wrong. Just think of one of those habits. Take a moment to recall some of the specifics of it. Really connect with the habit. Now let's think about that habit within the context of how the four conditions show up in you. What is it in how your brain has evolved to protect you, to react to threats that might be playing a role here? What is it in your gene pool, such as, in my case, my inclination to be reactive? That's playing a role in shaping this habit and making it so real and so powerful, persistent. And what is it in your conditioning, especially when you were young? What was going on in your life when you were old enough to be aware of what was happening around you, but still too young to do much of anything about it, to deal with it skillfully? How might that be playing a role in the presence of this habit? And finally, what social and cultural norms in your life, again, both when you were young and currently, may be shaping how this habit shows up in you? And just taking a moment here and sitting with how one or more of the four conditions beyond our control are in play. And now shifting into a more meditative place, perhaps beginning by taking a couple of deep breaths after all this cognitive processing and letting go of whatever extra energy is present. Maybe paying attention to your breaths for a few counts. Just centering yourself. And recalling a recent experience when this habit showed up. Sometime in the last 2 to 3 weeks, when this habit we explored earlier really showed up front and center in your life. Where were you? Who was present? What was happening? And being in the observer role. In fact, watching a little video of yourself as this habit showed up, observing yourself. And what thoughts, emotions, sensations are arising as you're observing yourself in the experience of this habit. And just allowing those thoughts and emotions to be present. It's okay. This is what's arising in this moment. Sensing any space that's arising as you're observing and allowing. And now bringing to mind one or more of the 4 conditions that have played a role in shaping this habit. Noting how those conditions influence this particular experience. And focusing for a few moments on how much one of these 4 conditions or more was beyond your control. Beyond your control. Letting that reality sink in. perhaps even forgiving the situation, since so much of it arose from what's beyond your control. We forgive others when their behavior is beyond their control. Forgiving ourselves in the same situation. Sensing into whatever space is arising out of this understanding and allowing and observing. Perhaps even forming an intention about how you might show up the next time this habit comes into play. Making your own choice. A choice not controlled by grasping and fear. Just how you'll show up. And letting go of all of that and gently bringing your attention back to your breathing. Concentrating on the feeling of breathing in your body.